Good afternoon. This is Sam Lott, and I'm carrying on today with my album reviews of the Beatles studio albums, that series, with the second album with the Beatles, released in November 1963. Now, I know I said at the end of the last video that I was going to unbox the mystery album, which is on its way, but it hasn't arrived yet. It might arrive tomorrow. And secondly, I just thought I was ready to move on to the second Beatles album, if that's okay. Now, it's just a few notes I've written. In between the first and second albums, the band had two British #1 hits in a row, From Me to You and She Loves You. She Loves You, the second of which was released in August 1963, became their first million-selling single in the UK. Now, the song She Loves You is the song which truly started what is known as Beatlemania, a pandemonium which people hadn't seen the like of before, screaming fans at every concert. Not for a pop band anyway. And that just grew. It grew throughout Britain, and eventually the US, which I will get to in a future video. But then we get to November 1963. And the Beatles' second album, With the Beatles, was released. Now, With the Beatles, the second album is pretty much the same formula as the debut album, 8 originals and 6 covers. Let me break that down a bit more. 7 Lennon and McCartney songs, and George Harrison wrote his first song on this album, Don't Bother Me, which I will get to. Now, the influences on this album are... There's girl group influences, rock and roll, 50s rock and roll, which they loved, R&B, but unlike the first album, there's a Motown, American Motown influence, which was very popular at that time, with quite a few bands, British and American. Now, the album cover, the iconic album cover, was shot by Robert Freeman, who actually passed away earlier this year, and he went on to take a lot of the Beatles' famous album covers. He took this photo in a hotel room in England, and it was in a corridor actually, and the lights were turned off, and that's where this cool, moody, black and white effect came from, which has been parodied and copied by not just a lot of bands and musicians, but in popular culture as well, on cartoons and TV shows and movies. It's very iconic. But the influence, it was their request that they would have this style of cover and not smile in it, actually, because if you look at their first album, they're kind of smiling, and this one does have a better effect with the moody look, you know. But it came from... John and George were photographed by Astrid Keischer, the photographer who was friends with them in Hamburg, Germany, after her partner, Stuart Sutcliffe, died of a brain hemorrhage at 21 years old. So that was the influence for the second album cover with the Beatles. Now, that's the album cover explained. Into the songs. The album opens up with It Won't Be Long, which is a brilliant rocking opening number. I love John's vocals, very raw, and I love the call and response from It Won't Be Long, yeah. Paul and George answer him there. Yeah, it's a great, just over 2 minutes, a great rocking, great way to start the album. The next song, All I've Got to Do, is written by John Lennon and influenced by the sort of girl groups, like the Shirelles, maybe, Motown, kind of, those kind of songs. The next song, All My Lovin', which is a very famous, well-known song, Paul's best song to date on a Beatles album, I believe, in the very early albums, and it's a great melody. And I read somewhere that it's the first song that he came up with the lyrics before the music, apparently. And next up we have Don't Bother Me, which is the first song George Harrison wrote on a Beatles album, and I wouldn't say it's a brilliant song. He would improve, of course, later on, but it's different. It's a different song for an early Beatles album. It's quite dark. It looks at the negative side of love. It's not like a boy meets girl kind of song, and he explained in the George Harrison Living in the Material World documentary, Martin Scorsese documentary about George's life in 2011, that he didn't think it was a particularly good song. He said in an interview, but he described it as an exercise to see if he could write a song. Because if John and Paul can write, everyone must be able to write. That's the funny thing he said. So yeah, it's a pretty good song. Next up, Little Child, which I don't. It's one of my least favorite Beatles songs. It's less than 2 minutes long. I don't rate it too highly, to be honest. Moving on to Till There Was You, which is from the musical The Music Man. It's a Paul. He decided to sing this song, and it's decent, and it was a popular song at the time, which with other singers before singing it because it was from a musical. And I like the acoustic guitar solo by George. There's a very nice touch on that. End Inside One is Please Mr. Postman, one of my favourites on the album. It's a Motown cover. It was sung by the Marvelettes, the black girl group, firstly in 1961. And we have this great cover from 63, great rocking version of it. And John's voice is on top form. And Paul and George sing the backing vocals, which are great. And it's kind of a call and response, kind of Motown. Well, it is a Motown song. It's a Motown cover. Opening up side 2, we have Roll Over Beethoven, a Chuck Berry cover of a Chuck Berry song. And it's energetic, and the Beatles would play it in Hamburg in the clubs, the Top 10, the Kaiserkeller, those clubs where they performed before they made it big. And George takes the lead vocal. And I think that it doesn't really... It's not much different to the Chuck Berry original. I like the energy on it, but it's a pretty good cover, but it's not one of my favourite songs, if I'm honest. Next up, we have Hold Me Tight, which is a pretty run-of-the-mill, early, just kind of love song. Hold Me Tight, Tell Me I'm the Only One. And I don't want to be too critical, but there's some instances in the song where Paul's singing is kind of out of tune. Maybe someone can enlighten me on that, another Beatles fan maybe, but that's what I've noticed. Next up, we have You Really Got a Hold on Me, which is a Smokey Robinson and the Miracles cover, a group who the Beatles loved, and they do a pretty good job on it, and moves along pretty well. Next up, we have I Want to Be Your Man, which is Ringo's vocal moment on the album. John and Paul wrote it and gave it to Ringo, which would be the case usually on... He would have one song on... He would have his time to shine on each Beatles album. And interestingly, this song became the first British hit and the second single for the Rolling Stones. They were struggling. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards were struggling for a follow-up to their first single, a cover of Chuck Berry's Come On. And Lennon and McCartney were just in town in London, and they rolled by to their studio, and they said, try this. I think John Lennon later said in an interview, it's not as if we were going to give him something good, kind of. That's a good comment. That's a typical comment from John. So I Want to Be a Man, the Ringo version, is pretty simple. I want to be your lover, baby. I want to be your man. The verse, and in the middle eight they sing... I Want to Be Your Man. It's very straightforward song. Not one of my favourites, but it's catchy, I suppose. Next up, we have Devil in Her Heart, a cover of a pretty not very well known American group called the Cookies. They sang it originally, and George sings this. It's his third and final song that he sings on, and it's not the best song, not the best cover, but it's not bad. I like every Beatles song. If I'm honest, there's not a song that I hate or think is bad. And then we get on to Not a Second Time, which is a fairly good song. It's short, as John Lennon wrote and sang it. And George Martin has a nice piano solo in the middle. Last but not least, we have the final song on the album, Money, That's What I Want. John rips up the vocal, similar to Twist and Shout closing their first album in a way. It's very rollicking. John takes the lead vocal. I can imagine him ripping it up in Hamburg and at the Cavern. So yeah, it's a fine way to close the album. So that's my review of the Beatles' second album. Not my favourite, but I'm only on the second album. We have a few more albums to get to, obviously. And it's the last time they would have the formula of the first two albums of 8 originals and 6 covers, because on the next album it's all original material. It's all, for the first time, Lennon and McCartney. There's no covers. And that's A Hard Day's Night, and I'll get to that in my next review. So, that's my review with the Beatles. I'd like to thank you for watching. Feel free to like, subscribe, share to your heart's content. And I'll see you soon. Thank you. Goodbye.